You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards, and today I have our great guest, Sarah Miller, who is our Associate Executive Director of Governmental Relations. We're going to be talking about this year's legislative priorities at the Capitol and what that means for school boards. So thank you, Sarah, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Isaac.
All right, let's just dive right on into it. We want to know what the priorities are. So what are the key legislative priorities for IASB in 2025?
For 2025, we have three key priorities. The first one, school safety, and I'm sure we're going to dive deeper into these in a little bit. But the first one is school safety, just really recognizing that students and staff need to be safe at school. Obviously, education is key, but you can't be educated if you're not safe in school. Local control and flexibility is number two. That's something we hear a lot from our board members about. And then number three is advocating and prioritizing state and federal funding, both for existing and growing needs.
Gotcha. And how were these priorities determined? What's the process look like to figure out what the goals are for the year?
You know, there's a few things that we used, and it's funny that you ask, because one of the things that we've been talking about is how to make it somewhat of a more formal process and get more member input, and so really have some kind of process before we go ahead and approve them and put them out to membership. But I would say that this year, three of the things that we kind of used to come up with the priorities, and it really was collaboration with the entire governmental relations team. As many of you know, Vision 2030 occurred last year. And so that was a big collaboration between ISA, IASB, which is the business officials, all kinds of groups, the regional offices of education and the special ed administrators, the principals, and I know I'm forgetting a few. But so those were really big conversations, and we did bring board members into those conversations. And so they did contribute to that. And so part of it was really looking through those key things that we had really contributed to Vision 2030. The other piece that we like to look at is the resolutions process, since that is an opportunity for board members to say, hey, this is important to our school district, and we think it should be considered by the entire association. So we looked at the resolutions and our position statements. And then finally, something we tried last year was the legislative events for the fall division meetings. And so there were some key topics that came up and really consistently across the state. I think sometimes we hear, oh, that's just a Southern Illinois thing, or that's like a suburban thing. But we really did hear about some issues that are impacting the entire state. And so thought those issues were important as well.
It is good to focus on the legislation that affects the broad majority of the state and not quite the smaller parts of it. I agree. That's a really good way to figure out those targets for the year. But how do these goals align with the needs and challenges faced by Illinois school districts? You kind of touched on this a little bit with the scope of the legislation.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we hear a lot from members is really funding, because there are, one of the interesting things about Illinois, we do have so much diversity, and I think that's amazing. And one of the things I love about Illinois, but I think the way, throughout Illinois, they just have different districts will have different priorities, whether they're, they really need to focus on their dual language programs, depending on their student population. Some districts might have a really great agricultural program that they focus on. But I think funding, it all comes down to funding. So they really need to have, EBF is what we talk about a lot. And that's obviously one of the focuses of our funding priorities. But there are other pieces that get talked about less, one of those being the MCATs, and those are the mandated categoricals, and that's something that we've really been trying to share with our districts and at our division meetings, that I think something that is shared across the state is like the need for transportation. It might be further in rural communities, but you also have a lot of suburban districts that do, have a lot of transportation needs. And so those types of things are really important. You can't educate kids until you get to school. And so depending on what the school's needs are, what the community's needs are, there's different priorities, but funding is really key to that. And then I think that's a similar concept with school security. One of the things that we've really been talking about is, school security looks different throughout the state. If you live in one of the suburban districts, you might be able to have police come to the school within a few minutes of calling them. I mean, as we've heard from a lot of our rural districts, that's a very different situation. You might be 15 or 20 minutes. And so one of the things we've been talking about in terms of school safety is kind of like the statewide guidance, what all the key things that all districts really should have in place to deal with safety situations, but then also how it might be different. So if you're in a smaller district, you might use a principal to do something, whereas, at a bigger district where you have, more, school counselors, it might be that position. So I think it's really a combination of finding things that all districts have in common and how can we provide guidance that really is important to have at every district level, but then also just recognizing that's going to be different. And so that kind of ties into the flexibility and local control that you need to accomplish something, but how you do that might be a little bit different depending on your school district.
Yeah, it's like a balance to target legislation that's, statewide, but also making it so that you have that flexibility on almost a per district level. And those areas that you're talking about have such different resources at their disposal to meet the challenges and needs of the students. So that sounds a really hard line to balance on.
No, it is. And I was just thinking about the local control and flexibility. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, and all of our members really share concern with unfunded mandates. But one of the things at the state level that we see is graduation requirements, and high school graduation requirements are the same. So no matter if you're at a huge district or a small district, they're the same. And so that's something, getting back to the flexibility, you might have different programs at your school, different partnerships with community colleges that might be really popular. There's all kinds of reasons why, you might want some of that flexibility at the local level. So I think it's a similar concept that we're really trying to push forward legislatively. Let's take a look at what those mandates are and what all students should have as a foundation. But where can we give schools some flexibility to say, hey, they might not need an entire semester of this. Can we combine some of these things? So if CTE programs are really big at one school, if there's other pathways, that schools can have the flexibility to let their kids focus on those opportunities.
Yeah, and now more than ever, mandates and funding are hot topics in school districts across the state. So yeah, these are really good points to make. Can you provide some examples, like thinking about in the past, can you provide some examples of past advocacy successes and their impacts on local school districts?
Sure. And I was actually thinking about this recently because I think of it as three types of success. I think sometimes we're putting forward an initiative and really trying to push that forward. It's something that comes from our districts and we kind of identify, hey, this is important, and really work on legislation to pass it. There's other times when a bill is filed and we might work on it. And I think a lot of times there's a good concept in the bill, and sometimes just the language is problematic because it's too much of a mandate. But we kind of see the need that the legislator is trying to get across. And so sometimes the accomplishment is really negotiating it and getting to a place where it's manageable for our school districts, and the legislator kind of gets their needs met, and then we get our needs met. And then sometimes the success is just there's a bill that is really problematic, and we really have to communicate with the legislator, this is why this isn't going to work for school districts. This is why this shouldn't move forward. I mean, one of the things I would share with successes is I think we've really been trying to talk to members and to legislators about the transportation mandated categorical, because that's a huge line item for some districts. And I think it's 2010 is the last time that we saw it fully funded. Mm-hmm. So we've really been sharing 15 years ago was the last time it was fully funded. And now I believe for regular transportation, the proration under this year's proposal is going to be 71% proration. And that just keeps going down. And for special ed transportation, I think the projected level is 61%. And so that's falling more and more on local school boards, local property taxpayers. So one of the things that we've been communicating is, hey, this is really important. Yes, let's prioritize EBF, but let's not forget about these other funding streams. And so we did last year hear that there's some interest, or last week rather, we heard that there's some interest by a couple senators on pushing a bill that really does increase those mandated categoricals. So that's really helpful. And then, I would say there's a couple bills too that, that we did a really good job negotiating, and they're more manageable. But I did realize the one thing, and I had touched on this already, is the high school curriculum that I think it's come up in a couple different contexts. One context it's come up in advocacy successes is there was a really big mandates reduction bill. And part of that has been this mandates reduction council, where we can really do a deeper dive into bigger issues. And we've talked about possibly doing the high school credits, mandated or just required credits, talking about it through that avenue. There's also another bill by Representative Tarver who's kind of come up with the same concept and really wants to do a deep dive into curriculum mandates. So I think part of our success is just talking about it a lot, getting our members to talk about it with their legislators. Hey, this really needs to be looked at. And I think it's been 20 years since they've actually taken a look at those high school requirements, and things have changed in the last 20 years. So I think that's going to be an important conversation. And so when we actually get some momentum and some traction after we've been saying things for a while, I think that's a big success for us.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to measure success there. What strategies does IASB use to engage lawmakers and promote its legislative agenda, talking about those successes? How do you start that process? I mean, I know I can think of one tool that we use is the calls to action emails that we send out to our members. That's a great vehicle for getting people aware of a situation and understanding how it affects your school district. So I can have any other examples like that.
Yeah, I think the calls to action, sometimes we use those when we've just done everything that we can and the bill has momentum and we know there's going to be a negative impact on our districts. And so we really need our members to start reaching out. I think one of the things that we would like to do is use that to promote legislation that we really like as well. So we actually are getting together a fact sheet on, there was a piece of legislation that was introduced. It didn't get a lot of publicity, but we actually started hearing from school districts this year that it's becoming a really big problem. So a lot of our districts are having issues with FOIA requests that are generated by AI.
Oh, interesting.
So some districts are getting 10 to 15 a week. And they're like, do we respond to these? We don't know that an actual human is the one that is sending these requests. And so we heard about this actually from some of our outreach and training directors. We had a couple school law attorneys reach out to us and say, hey, this is really becoming a big issue. We were tracking bills. We knew that Representative Didich had a bill that addressed just that. And there's actually a bill by Representative Gong Gershowitz that would prevent, it would protect districts from having to open attachments, because some districts are finding that when they open attachments that are connected to FOIA requests, they're compromised. And so it's compromising their IT systems. So obviously, FOIA is there to promote transparency and it's an important law, but we also don't want it to be abused. And so one of the things, we actually had a conversation with Representative Didich and kind of told him the issues that our districts are struggling with. And so that's one of the things we wanted to put together a fact sheet, distribute it to our advocacy ambassador members, and really use that as a vehicle to start having conversations with members. Hey, this is something that could really help our districts. So I think, there's times definitely, there's a waiver bill that we were really concerned about. We sent out a couple action alerts saying, hey, we really need to stop this. But we're actually, really thinking about too, what are the ways that we can use those tools to promote things that are really beneficial to school districts and really could protect them.
Yeah. And for those of you wondering what the Advocacy Ambassador Program is, we did a great episode on that last year. Highly encourage you to check that out and look on our website to see if you want to get interested or get involved with that program, because it kind of is for people who go above and beyond calling a legislator is great, but I think it's something to be said about showing up in person to the Capitol. I mean, does that happen sometimes, or?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we've been talking about. When people ask me how to get involved, my first response is just being informed about what the issues are is really important. Obviously, anything that's important to your districts, legislators want to hear about, and that's important to bring to them. But it's also important to know what is important to them and what's being discussed at the Capitol, what their fellow legislators are telling them about. So I think getting informed is the first piece of it. But yes, I absolutely think reaching out to legislators through email, through meetings, through, one-on-one events, all of those things are really critical. And I think everyone has a different comfort level. I know some school members have all their legislators on speed dial. If there's anything, they can contact them right away. Yeah. Others might be more comfortable with going to an event once a year. So I think any way that you can make that connection is great. But I do like to tell school board members, try and make that connection before it becomes urgent, before you kind of say, oh, like, now this is like an urgent situation and I really need their help, because there are going to be things that affect your school district. So yeah, that's why we wanted to kind of use the tool of, hey, here's a fact sheet. Here's something that you could talk to your legislators about, related to FOIA requests. If it's an issue, just making that connection, just saying, hey, just so you know, this is impacting our district. And then when something becomes more significant, then you have that connection and it's easier to reach out to them. Yeah. So, but yeah, there's avenues. I would say calling, emailing, coming to the Capitol in Springfield, but also their district offices. And then I never like to leave out our federal advocacy efforts too. We do a trip each September to DC, and that's a great opportunity to connect with federal legislators as well.
Yeah, you have plenty of great opportunities to get involved and make your voice heard and make sure that the needs of your district and your surrounding community are heard by your legislator. Kind of speaking of the local community, what role do school community groups and local businesses and other organizations play when influencing education policy? Because it is more than just the board, I would think, right? The surrounding community can also be impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we do as advocates, we do connect to other communities as well. We are part of a group called BIFAC, which is more of a business community, because some of the things that impact them really do impact schools as well. When you're talking about school lunches and what materials can be used. So that's a really good resource, because there's something that might not be as obvious to us that's going through the legislative process that we realize, oh, this is going to impact costs. One example is some changes to construction materials that anyone could use, but then it was brought to our attention that this is going to raise prices by 50% if you're repaving your parking lot, that type of thing. So I think it is really important to connect outside the community. But I think one of the things that I love about public education, and I think you see throughout the state, is if you have a really strong public education system, that really benefits the entire community. And so I think having those connections with local businesses, with organizations, is really important. And there's definitely times, like if you have strong parent advocacy groups, and there's something that's really important to your district, then they can also be reaching out to legislators and advocating on the school district's behalf. And I think the one thing that I hear from legislators when we go to them, they really like to hear the impact on students. So the extent that parents can bring that community members can bring that, it's really important.
Yeah, and it is so interesting to see how you pull one thread and it impacts like 16 others, especially when it comes to legislation, because at the face value, it's like, this is a great piece of legislation. Then you hear from other people like, whoa, hey, this impacts us, maybe not as nicely as it seems on paper. And so just seeing how one seemingly innocuous piece of legislation can really impact a lot of people, probably more than was intended. It's always so fascinating to me. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of those issues. I think with employment, there's something that, the businesses might be dealing with, but hey, we're school districts, we're school boards, we're employers also, and it's going to impact us. So that's the fun. We get to deal with the curriculum, the education funding, but then we get to deal with all the other, things in labor and pensions and transportation, all those other committees as well.
Are there any emerging opportunities that could help advance IASB's legislative goals?
There are. We've been thinking a lot about advocacy lately, and so there's going to be some things coming up next year. One thing that I do share with school board members, I think any opportunities to get involved. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that has been great is our federal advocacy conference in DC. It's just a great opportunity to meet with legislators. I believe it's September 7th through 9th this year. But one of the things I heard from our members is that it was also a really great opportunity to connect with other school board members throughout the state. I know we have our joint annual conference, which is amazing, but it can be kind of overwhelming. So this was like a perfect, I think there were probably about 40, maybe 40 members that came, and it was just a really nice group. So they got to know each other. And I'll just say personally, it was really interesting to see them connecting and understanding what some of the rural needs are. Broadband connectivity is a really big topic at the federal level. And so some of the more rural communities really need that connectivity for school bus rides, like when their kids are on the bus for 45 minutes and, because they don't have great access, they really benefit from that piece of legislation. So that's a great opportunity. And again, a plug for advocacy ambassadors. We do meet once a month, and really we kind of start that meeting by doing a half an hour overview of this is all the stuff going on in Springfield right now, and so kind of give that information, but then spend 15, 20 minutes talking about what are school board members hearing, give them a chance to respond to the legislation that's been introduced, but also to kind of tell us what they're hearing about other bills and if there's other things of interest to them. So it's a really nice group of school board members, and we are talking about ways to grow that as well, to do more advocacy, more in-person events as well.
Excellent. Yeah, the more the better. Excuse me. My final question for you is, how can school boards plan for future advocacy efforts in what really is an evolving political landscape? What can you do as an individual versus as a group?
Yeah, I think, and I've seen both. I think sometimes you have boards where like one member is really, really active and, policy is their thing, and they kind of do that on behalf of the board. And I think that's great. I've also seen other boards where they go to events together and they all like to get involved. I think one of the really nice things with our federal advocacy conference, I know one district had 2 board members. And so they would kind of rotate it where the board member would go for 2 years. And then, so the first year they were kind of a newbie. And then the next year they had some experience, and then they would bring a new board member on. And so the person who had a year experience would kind of share what the new person needed to do. So they would kind of rotate it that way so that they had some continuity in that experience, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. But I think, whether it's as an individual or as a board, it really is kind of being informed of what's going on and then reaching out to legislators. But I will put a plug in for the resolutions process, because I think that's a really great way to kind of say, hey, this is an issue that's impacting our district. And I think it's going to impact other districts as well. And I think IASB should be aware of this and know that our membership thinks this way. So we just put out our call to resolutions recently, and so that's going to be open until June 25th, I believe. But I think just that process and the discussion that plays out at delegate assembly is really important and a great opportunity for school board members to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's the most direct, impactful way you can really change legislation and submit your ideas. And it's just a great forum for that kind of work.
Can I make one comment to that? Because we had a resolution that was submitted last year by one of our downstate districts, and they're really struggling with health insurance and just getting affordable health insurance, and had filed a resolution basically saying, can we be part of the CMS system, which is a state system? And knew that would be a big lift, but it did pass out of the delegate assembly. And then lo and behold, like a legislator actually introduced legislation, and we went and talked to them and said, hey, this is actually a really big issue. And then one of the committee chairs caught wind of it and said, hey, my district is, having some issues as well. Can we have a conversation about this? And so they're planning on having a subject matter hearing. And so I think, I would just tell members that sometimes things start small. You might not be able to accomplish it in 1 year, but starting that resolution process, it put it on our radar. Hey, this is really a growing issue in Illinois. Here's a possible solution. Start having those conversations. There's obviously a lot of details that would need to be worked out, but it's really important to have those conversations and let legislators know.
I agree. Yeah, that's a very encouraging story. Thanks for sharing that. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you about this year's legislative priorities, and I hope that our members can take away some key points from that and hopefully help encourage other folks on their board to get involved and make their voices heard at the Capitol.
Thank you, Isaac. It was great being here.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.